Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Wendy lovingly stroked the smooth side of the glass cylinder of pickles. She leaned over it and inhaled the pleasant aroma of fresh garlic, dill, and leaves, which she was sure to add to her creations. Now she would cover the next batch with metal wings, roll it up, set it out, refrigerate it, and then take it to the basement on a shelf. She thought for the 100th time, well, this year's harvest of vegetables in the vegetable garden and myself in winter will not remain hungry and sons in the city of supplies to the table to plant. Behind her back in the corner of the summer kitchen, there was a faint sound and some inarticulate swarming. It woke up her mother, peacefully doozing, whispered, odors gurgling, what on the stove need? Since ancient times, there stands a sturdy top vat with a pile of old blankets and pillows. Now she's dragged Miranda in there on her own so she can keep an eye on it. The old lady wasn't exactly ancient though, just over 70 years old. She'd been off her feet for 5 years. The doctors just gave her the benefit of the doubt. There are no physical abnormalities, no stroke or other symptoms that could have ordered her legs not to walk. Not even close. They keep the lower extremities on their own more. Your mother's frail body refuses to fulfill its physiological purpose. Miranda is a personality in the village, famous back in the days when everything in the village was ruled by the Soviet farm. Without her ubiquitous nose, no important case could go without. The little woman was like Thumbelina in appearance. She could command the front. No one milked better than her on the farm. Cows in the field for haying. The men could never keep up with her. She'd dig potatoes in her garden. People marvel at her. They also measure where to put the strawberries to dry. Miranda already has smooth potatoes in bags waiting for their time. Some traveling businessman slipped it to me. Somehow that nickname followed the perky little girl. Everyone picked it up at once. The rustic and perpetual motion machine failed to cope with the loads and overnight fell out of working order, as if the battery inside had run out of charge. Wendy herself was a tall and stately woman. Not to be particularly squat, she certainly couldn't be called fat. She was all juicy, appetizing, tall. One huge blue eyes of all shades of field vessel cova, yes. Eternally imposed kerchief, hiding at, dripped light thick hair. In the old days, they would have said here she is a real beauty, but I don't know why. Wendy didn't compliment those compliments. She'd pick up a lightweight like dragging an old motorcycle into a cradle. She had a knack for her father's mechanical inheritance. Her father had long gone to the other world, but managed to accustom his daughter to friendship with the iron helper. In the countryside, motorcycle finds something to transport small things to the store to run for provisions. There's only one sugar for jam and compote. We have to buy a quintal of it. It's a nice thing to solve all sorts of problems on wheels. So now Wendy's mother didn't keep her inside the 4 walls of the house. To the river to refresh in cool water, while Mom, covered in the shade of the pile, Willow will sit. Together went to a distant berry plot with strawberries, red-black currants. Also in company with Miranda. Wendy. In the rows wanders Mom near the bike, buckets with the harvest guarding. That's it. Both women are not in grief alone. Blood of their own. A barrel at their side. It's good to be alive. Not to see his favorite stove. Infirm Martin would have been very upset. He was burned 6 years ago from a simple flu. His immunity was already weakened with age, and the disease had a dead grip on him. He was almost 20 years older than his wife, and still remembered plowing and sowing almost by hand without machinery. A face among the cows first seen. The sometimes capricious milk supplier obeyed the impudent Divchana. Unquestioningly. At that time, the man thought that it seemed that Miranda was afraid of the hoofed ladies and carefully gave her everything that had gathered in their name. There was no time for dating and courtship in that difficult time. At an evening in the village club, Martin made a speech to the locals as a specialist sent from a neighboring, more prosperous area. He called for help to the poor labor, inspired them to do good. After his speech, the girl herself came up to him and extended a small, strong palm. You have said everything right, comrade. Who? If not us, will raise the economy to new heights. I'm Miranda. If you need help, feel free to contact me. By the way, 40-year-old Martin was very handsome and smiling, had that very male charm, which the female sex will never pass by indifferently. All the widows in the village were already looking at him with interest. But he didn't notice anything and nobody around him, just as he came out of the club that day to walk her home and discuss farm business. That's how he fell in love, definitively and irrevocably. His feelings were mutual. Miranda wasn't embarrassed by the age difference or the mockery of the sex. Our little girl chose an old man as her soulmate. A little gold, but dear to the newcomer, and he turned out to be a good man. Look, ladies and gentlemen, the girl's spinning our farmer's leader. Martin and Miranda got married right after the harvest was over. They didn't have a place of their own. Miranda's parents did not say a word against their love. Primakov came to the small house of his parents and wife. He lived there for the rest of his life. Together his parents and in time spent their last journey. Next to a beloved woman, everything seems simpler and easier. After 3 years of marriage, they had Wendy. Would her parents have wanted her to have a brother or sister later? Yes, Miranda's doctors advised against any more risks. In the maternity hospital, whole delegations visited the children's ward. Little Dumne was born a girl, almost 60 centimeters tall and weighing 5 kilograms. The doctors were very disappointed. You're a mommy with a female anomaly. They don't give birth. With such tiny babies, such big babies. You should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. Martin and Miranda just smiled. So our dad's 6 feet tall. We've got a big baby girl to look up to. Wendy was not a giant afterwards. She grew and developed like all other peers. Beauty in her father, energy in her mother. It was a strange combination. She was already approaching 50 years of age, and the fact that I was endowed with beauty from my parents and God she never recognized. She always ran past the mirror, not looking in it without need. At dances and festivals in the shadow of other village charming young man. One joy in the world. Son Andrew, who lives in the regional center. Now she's going to deal with the cucumbers. She'll start on zucchini and cherry jam. Mom, thank God, with a bright mind and good memory, will always support with words and advice. She'll pat your head when you start to sit up. Will she look into your eyes with her pure gaze? Wendy thought to herself that the fact that her mother's legs had failed was pain. The hopelessness of the hour with Martin's husband coming to the graveyard. A loving woman could not accept this loss. Refused, but the groom's on the empty. Now for her the earth without her beloved to tread beside. Wendy picked up her mother with the usual motion. Now I'm for you. You are my good ones. We'll drink tea later. I got your favorite cookies from the store. And Miranda hugged her daughter by the neck, pressed against her warm shoulder with her cheek. My poor girl, for what have you suffered in this life, such a heavy cross of struggle and meed? Forever given your heart to one single man. Why have you suffered such anguish of female loneliness? For what such a sin? She read to herself before her eyes. The images of 30 years ago floated by themselves. It was a blazing hot rural summer, and the farm, which had already lost a lot of its resources, could barely cope with the tasks set before it. People fled to the city. Physical labor in the field ceased to be pride and glory. Tirelessly toil. How to live on became increasingly unclear. To give from the problems of the farm, at least somehow cope with the harvest. And watermelons and melons on the richer. A student group was sent from the city. They put them in a school. They didn't promise them any money. The farm was impoverished lately, but they promised to feed them heartily in the club, so that young people would not be bored in the evenings every other day. Imported movies began to spin before the disco under the tape recorder with hits of Soviet pop arranged. Wendy had just finished school. Caught a cold when in the studio it is not yet warmed up, as should the river from swimming. When it was time to apply to the regional university, she dreamed of becoming a biologist. The girl was lying down with a fever. They even thought of putting her in the hospital. Yes, Miranda said she'd cure her daughter herself. At the family council, it was decided that she shouldn't go to the army. She can work in the countryside for a year without rushing. And next year, she could go to university. A suitable vacancy was found quickly. Cooks in the canteen, where they fed the student group, did not have time to set the tables 3 times a day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. City workers were squeamish about rubbing their blades with napkins. Yes, the cutlery would run under the sink for another wash. There was no time for 2 women cooking 50 people, also for perfect cleanliness and beauty of serving dishes. To keep track, needed a savvy assistant. Wendy recovered from his illness. A week after the students arrived in the village. I had not met any of them yet. When Miranda's friend advised that she and her partner had been knocked off their feet in the cafeteria, Miranda remarked gravely, "A shift in the field. The ruins of our once thriving farm will do more good. Let Wendy go. It won't do you any good. She'll be home all summer. She's quite recovered now." Marked by a bright and unusual event. The girl at the new workplace already on the first day went with a tray full of glasses, with compote. Before lunch, yes, on a small puddle at the table slipped. Set fragile dishes tray fell out of her hands and flew to the floor, as in slow motion. A few seconds later, a bright maroon stain spread across the surface full of small glasses. Wendy rushed to collect them in her work apron to keep the students already gathering at their tables from frolicking. The treacherous piece from the wounded glass entered her hand so quickly that she didn't even feel the pain at first. A purple stain began to split the hand just above her palm, and drops of what looked like red rowan berries dripped onto the floor. Winter Wendy felt dizzy. Gathered around the crowd, some guy shrugged his shoulders. "Stay out of the way. My dad's a surgeon. I know how to provide expert care for deep wounds like this. Get the first aid kit." What's a first aid kit in a country canteen? A bottle of iodine, an empty packet of bandages, small, narrow, and light plasters rolled up like a roll. Analgin tablets. That's the entire medical supply. Seeing the first aid kit would help him. Hardly a guy abruptly pulled off his light cotton shirt and tore it like a bandage, carefully took out the glass, caught the sharp end in the neck. In the hand of the girl, treated the wound with iodine and wrapped it with a cloth. That's it. You can get to the local paramedic now. I'll take you there. Let's get acquainted, shall we? My name's Vep. Wendy looked up at her healer. Tall, serviceable. The face of an intelligent city boy with gray and intelligent, not for his age eyes, looks at her straight openly. With a smile, he is already a hand, and holds out his hand to go together to the village health center. He's even going to skip lunch for the occasion. He'll be hungry for the rest of the evening because of her. Ben, a fellow, was already holding out a plaid shirt, which he was wearing over his t-shirt. The unwilling doctor deftly pulled it over his sturdy torso and smiled at the student. "I'll have your closet back to you in an hour. Thanks, friend. I need to change anyway," Wendy told Charming and Savior. I thought to myself, he's not like our local boys. Clean, neat, and tidy, polite. Not like Nick and his boyfriend from high school. Shirts always open. Dirty pants with stains all over them. Always with a cigarette in his mouth. What kind of groom is he? Shouldn't they have been sent to the country with each other or something? There's no happiness in pie. So my little sister's favorite Carlson said he refused the offer to have dinner after all. Ben, I'll hand you over to your village army, then we'll go. What a lovely word from Fist. Wendy thought to herself, you've got to keep your eyes open with these city folk. They always have words, abstruse quotations from books. And she from ancient times, except for fiction and school curriculum, and a large colorful books in the world, fauna and flora of other printed publications in her hands did not hold. After that book, and she had a dream to become a biologist and study the animal world. But so far these bright prospects were pushed away from her for a whole year after an unfortunate bronchitis. They walked to the point in silence. Ben didn't ask her any unnecessary questions, seeing that she was already writhing in pain from time to time. The paramedic in the office immediately praised the one who was next to the grief-stricken waitress. Look how skillful she was, treated early. Who could do it so well? I tried to do everything I could. Without false modesty, Ben announced, I come from a family of hereditary surgeons. Father, mother, grandfather. All of whom weren't just born with a scalpel in their hands. I'd be a fool not to have basic first aid skills. After handing Wendy over to the medical officer as promised. The guy bowed courteously and disappeared out the door. He was the only one in sight. Wendy only had to look at him with annoyance and make a judgment. Such a thing with a country girl of no description. No long acquaintance to drive. Not according to her simple wall, though with eyes as blue as lakes, such an exquisite city hat. The prince from the fairy tale read to them as a child by the kindergarten teacher, for his princess on a carriage to the doors of the dining room will not come. Wendy was wrong. The next day, the first person she saw outside the dining room was Ben. He greeted her again with that impossible warm smile of his and said, "It's my legal day off after 3 shifts. Let me help you. Is your arm healed? I don't think it stopped hurting early. We can do it better together. Then we'll go to the movies. An old comedy at the club tonight. Have you seen this movie before?" Wendy, the ground is out from under her feet. She's not the one being greeted at the cafeteria by a real knight. She's not the one called to the movies after work. She's not the one offered help with the tray, forks, spoons. It couldn't be, because it could never be. But it was happening now in real life. Ben didn't seem at all intent on hiding his obvious interest in her. Wendy chased away the memories ill-timed to come over her after fiddling with the string of cylinders, with the pickles. Biting Miranda into the soft plate, she sat her down to the table to finally end the day with a huge herbal tea. Summer is about to roll smoothly into its second half. Time is running. Not like in my youth, it stretched like sweet molasses, all at once. After tea, Miranda asked to go to bed. It's time for her to go to bed. She has plans for this summer: warmth, pickles, and Napoleon. I don't know what to do with anything else. She'll get the New Year's gifts in the fall. It's unlikely she'll be able to get into town before then. Tomorrow is a new day and new troubles. Then there were other summer days that were good for cooking. Wendy was a glorious hostess, what she could cook from yards of vegetable garden and orchard. This is the cabin. She and Mom had a dilapidated and old one. And everything that on the ground and in the ground grew always succeeded to glory. After finishing the epic with cucumbers, I made juice from all the fruits. What on the trees had time to ripen. It was my turn to put tomatoes in jars, then apricots and apples, plums and pears to cut into big slices, and send them out to sunbathe on the metal sheets. My son always liked her dried fruit compote. It's a simple matter to make it for himself at home in the city. Wendy looked with annoyance at the sacks with potatoes, improvised nets from old, full stockings, tightly packed golden onions, and sighed, though I have a lot of strength. All this wealth to the city on my hump. I'll have to go to Nick again, and he'll start his own bullshit. When are you gonna marry me, Wendy? 30 years I've been waiting for you. I'll give up vodka and ticks. You know me by now. Smoking all the way in the cabin and making jokes with lewd innuendos. He won't let it go. Old dog's been married a long time. 3 grown children. He's got grandchildren now, but he keeps looking at her questioningly, as if to read something in them. Don't believe that first high school love never rusts. Nick's been her eternal sighing buddy since he was young. He never got anything. One thing's for sure, if she asked him to drive his car to Andrews, he'd never say no. By the morning of December 25, a snowstorm had, as it turned out, broken out. Wendy had already agreed with her neighbor Maria that she would review 2 or 3 Miranda bags for Andrew, which were so voluminous that the faithful Nick only quacked when he saw them at the doorstep. Be thankful that my heart's heavy on you. No fool would agree to carry all this stuff into town on our dirt road to the highway. Only my iron horse could do that. If you'd hauled your sacks to the bag on a motorcycle, I wouldn't be so kind to you. Wendy hastily slipped him a pre-prepared bottle of her famous infusion of all seasonal fruits and berries. The secret of this elixir with degrees was as simple as which fruit or berry dared to layer the coveted layer at the bottom of the 10-liter container. The next fruit came up with him, the same manipulation is done. And so until the last fall harvest of cold, resistant berries. Give this one. Micah 21 days to go through a good process of living to separate from the remnants of fruits and berries. And then vodka from the village store to fix, and the same for sufficient disinfection of the drink, received as a result of taste unprecedented. The whole village was waiting for Wendy and Miranda to give them this gift. Nick pushed the bag of cash away, grabbed Wendy by the arm. No such gift. I've been waiting for you, Grandma, for so many years. You're the only one for ages. Korotayev, you're not a stone, Wendy, and you're not flying. I can't believe you're still faithful to your first love. It doesn't work like that. Wendy heartily pushed Nick away and gritted through his teeth. You're the only man on this planet. I'll never be yours. You hear me, Nick? Don't you understand what it's like to remember and love one man all your life? How many times have we had this conversation? I consider you a friend, not by way of the road, but not angry. Why are you playing that song again? We can't pick sweet berries together, but bitter berries I've already cut off without you a long time ago. Let's start the car. Soon the snowstorm will start, and you still have to go back to the village for the light. The days are short these days. It'll be dark before you know it. Andrew was in high spirits this morning. His company's corporate party was to coincide with Christmas. On this occasion, this Saturday was rented a nice cozy cafe near their office. From some time ago, a new female employee from the marketing department has been actively making eyes at him. Today, he would invite her to his house after the party for a cup of coffee. Andrew sighed dreamily and mentally assured himself, women like me. I change them like tired gloves, no longer suitable for the closet that has lived its age. This young lady wouldn't be able to resist. He was sure of his complete male inevitability. So, look, and New Year's vacations they will spend together with this person. It is necessary to prepare a liver salad for the festive table. It is necessary to put order at last in his careless bachelor's den. Lubricated face and appetizing figure, the new girl will be an extra prize. With an ex-girlfriend. He'd been broken up for 2 weeks. It was time to find a worthy replacement. Someone who wasn't preoccupied with complexes. She's not going to drag him to the registry office. The redhead in the neighboring department was definitely one of that placid cohort. Winter celebrations promised a lot of pleasant surprises. Coming out of the shower in only a towel, Andrew heard a knock at the door. He hurriedly opened the door and sent, "Mom, what are you doing here in town? Didn't expect you today, at all bad timing." Wendy, for some reason immediately confused by such a cold reception, wanted to hug her son. She missed the diplomats in her teeth, but he squeamishly removed her hands. "You should warn me about your unexpected visits. I may have very different plans for the near future. And then you show up. How did you manage to surprise me? What are you dragging across the threshold? Look at your bags, leaving a wet trail on the floor." The events that followed seemed to Wendy like a bad dream for a long time afterwards. Andrew angrily kicked the bag with potatoes, pushed aside the stocking with onions, lovingly packed by his mother in a plastic bag so that it would not get wet. With annoyance, he settled down on a large bag with pickles. "How could you think, Mother, that I'm starving here? There's a supermarket around the corner. The shelves are overflowing with goods. So I tried to collect for the winter holidays for you, Andrew. Ear all my homemade natural." Andrew, angrily insulted in response, "Leave these country quirks to yourself. I have long been a city dweller and live by the rules of a large metropolis. I'm not going to waste my time on your culinary riches. Pack all this stuff back up, and next time you'll give me advance notice of your visit. I need a mother who'll take care of me like a little chicken. Don't you have an old friend in town who's lonely? Go to her with all these presents. I'll make the old lady happy, a New Year's offering." The young man grabbed the grocery bags and began carrying them out into the entryway, without letting his mother enter the apartment, without at least offering to warm herself with tea. It seemed to Wendy that none of this was happening to her. Her decision couldn't do this to her. What evil spells this town had laid it under? Nick's automobile must have already driven out of town toward home. She hasn't checked in with her city friend in over a year. Who knows if it's okay to go see her now? Or will she also give a turn? Outside, the snowstorm was getting worse. The snow was no longer falling in large, fluffy drifts. In the meantime, Andrew took all the presents to her mother into the yard, which was empty in such weather. It was getting dusk on the city, darkness slowly descending. Loving the cold weather, it was early in the day. "I called you a cab. I hope you remember your high school buddy's address clearly. I've wasted so much time with you. I gotta get myself cleaned up for the New Year's Eve party. You should know that I'm going through some changes in my personal life. You're going to be here. There's nothing for you to do in town anytime soon. I'll be fine on my own. I'll be 30 years old in April. I don't need your pesky tutelage anymore." A young guy came to the call. He fussily began to put food supplies in the trunk, all the while looking back at the angry man and the woman who had somehow passed away. I'd even thought to myself, there's something wrong between them. Ivolchenkov looks at the trembling Vanya. Well, it's none of my business. I'll fulfill the order and get on my way. New Year's Eve and the vacations themselves. If you try a couple of months, then until spring will feed. Wendy got into the car without looking back. It was so unbearable, painful on her soul, as if something bright, always warming her soul with dirt. Not to wash it away, not to drown out the vile odor of decay again in her soul. No movies, no bath songs. She is too pampered to please Miranda. Always in the store, all those fragrant bathing lotions bought the old woman delighted, then stayed from their fragrance. So in this case, the subtle scent vibes were unable to remove the blackness. I only relaxed when I climbed into the back seat. The tears just kept flowing. I couldn't stop them from flowing. Though I didn't like to show weakness in public, there was no strength to hold back. The driver asked me nicely, "Where are we going, my dear?" The answer shocked him. I can be thrown out in the middle of nowhere. My son didn't even ask if I had the money to pay you for the job. Prices are different in the city. I don't have enough cash reserves for a long ride. You know, Inna suddenly became lively. I can pay you back with village produce. Potatoes. I've got a marvelous turnip crop. A few cylinders of cucumbers and tomatoes from my own beds. That'll pay. The cab driver has seen a lot in 2 years of work in this city. But he had never read such hopeless sorrow in anyone's eyes. As if from a living son, he was now taking this woman to nowhere. It felt like she'd just buried him. It didn't take him long to make up his mind. He soon said, "Why do we need your woman's gifts? Why can't we find a plate of pilaf and a cup of hot tea for a good man? And if I'm bad, don't choke. So I have an eye for sour cream and a good heart from a bad and deceitful one I will always distinguish. I'll bring you to us now. Don't be afraid of anything near me." There weren't many highlights in Wendy's life, except a few trips with Andrew to the sea in those happy times when they were so attached to each other. Once they arrived in sunny Arizona, they both fell in love with the place. Then, after high school, Andrew graduated from the technical university in the city. He stayed in a dormitory there at first. He didn't make such a brilliant career, but his income was enough for current expenses. Then he rented a cozy 2-room apartment almost in the center. He spent a lot of time in the company of student friends and then colleagues. Wendy understood a mature young man cannot be kept near his mother's skirt. He hadn't been to the village for the last 2 or 3 years. She didn't own any modern gadgets. All communication was by means of an old cell phone. Her son called her no more than once or twice a month, reducing communication to brief questions and answers. And the connection in their wilderness was stable, but in bad weather it failed. Their estrangement from each other must have been imminent. But why does it hurt so much today then? Wendy visited her son annually under the winter holidays with the village inns. His present reaction had put her in a stupor. Andrew's soul had iced over in the tough city, or had something seriously changed in the world at all? She hadn't noticed. Only questions were beating in her head now, and there were no answers. The silent cab driver brought her to the outskirts of the city, to one of the houses where the owners of communal apartments used to live. She was not mistaken in one of these huge rooms with many doors leading into a corridor and an impressive kitchen. She and the young man entered. At first, she was confused. Within the walls of this apartment lived a whole Tabor, which now spilled out of all the rooms to consider the unexpected guest. All around came the sound of her incomprehensible speech. But there was no aggression in her tone. The fellow cab driver stopped all debate in a flash. In a couple of minutes, she was already escorted into an empty room with a small sofa, a coffee table, and an old, bumpy TV on a dresser. On the walls and on the floor were mats with national parliaments. Women with smiles handed her a set of bed linens, blankets, a large terry towel, house slippers, brand new. Wendy somehow immediately in that welcoming warmth. After a couple minutes, she caught on. Please, let's get some from the trunk. My supply's not as payment, not for your help, not your wonderful hospitality, but just sowing them in every potato or not cucumbers and tomatoes, a part of my soul. I really want you to feel it. After consulting among themselves, the apartment dwellers sent a whole delegation to the car, while the cab driver was hurriedly doing something in the kitchen. An hour later, when her savior, all day spinning the sheepskin to feed his family, has long since disappeared again in the clubs. After sorting out the blizzard, Wendy was called into the kitchen. She went in and marveled. There were so many people at the big long table that it made her eyes water. I thought, what a close-knit group of people. They can't all be members of the same family. At the head of the table were the elderly women. Further along the perimeter were younger ones, many children. The men in this tribe from Central Asia were almost all still at work. Their bread in a foreign land certainly could not be called easy. Wendy realized that she was familiar with local traditions and long-established household rituals. How difficult it was for these people from faraway lands to accept the rules imposed on them and survive in an unfamiliar reality. A leisurely dinner began, crowned by a large Chuvanov. Placer fifth word, Wingmaster a thumbs up in approval. What a strange day it is today, Solovyova thought after Wendy's dinner. It's still only 9:00 p.m. My eyes are already treacherously slipping. Not a single person at the table asked her a single question, as if she already knew. That's how it's been with them for 1,000 years. The nearest neighbor then showed her where the bathroom was and escorted her to her temporary abode. Amazing. I don't remember Andrew at all. The woman stated the fact. The thread that ties us together like an umbilical cord between a newborn baby and its mommy is severed. An insult. It's so obvious that all memories have fallen into the abyss of timelessness. What, when, and how had been related to him in her head was only a viscous porridge that had been poured too much water when boiled. She fell asleep with her head barely touching the pillow. Earlier, they had arranged with the cab driver, who would become her good wizard for the evening, that by 6:00 he would take her to the bus station, to the first bus towards their village. It takes 4 hours to get home on the highway. Then, if you are lucky enough to get a hitchhiker, it will take another half an hour to get to their village. The district administration promises that the road to their village will be asphalted. But they have been waiting for the promised 3 years for 30 years without a road. That was the last thing Wendy had time to think about before falling into a restful sleep. In the morning, the woman got up so alert that she was surprised at herself. Not a drop of despair after her son's treacherous stab in the back yesterday. The soul slammed shut. Yes, it was all on Andrew's doorstep. But emotions were at zero. No grief, no sadness, no longing. A large cup of coffee and a fresh scone with cheese was waiting for her in the kitchen. The same kind of scones. One of the older women was carefully folding them into a paper bag for her, gesturing that it was for the road. In her other hand, she held a clear plastic bag with a term paper. She shoved it in her hands embarrassedly and disappeared behind one of the doors. And then yesterday's cab driver arrived. So my mother had a little fun with my kinfolk. Not gray. They don't speak your language very well yet. My mom taught Russian at school in Kokand, Uzbekistan. That's why I'm so quick to communicate. She died of a serious illness when she was very young. Since then, I want to help every woman who is suitable for me as a mother by age. I won't hurt the young ones either. Why should I? But I try to be especially attentive to the older ones. To give them everything that my mother didn't have time to give. Your son will regret what he did yesterday 100 times over. He's about my age, but he hasn't matured into a man's true wisdom. He'll come crawling back to you on his knees. You'll remember my words later. Now let's hurry up. We'll miss your bus. After yesterday's snowstorm, the city was frozen in snow-white silence. Only lonely passersby were going about their business at this early hour. It wasn't even dawn yet, just a pink haze in the sky. After the bag of cards, nothing else pulled at her hands. Home to Mom. Hurry up. She missed their lodgings and her mother's caressing hands terribly. Walking lightly to the bus with 2 small bags was almost a pleasure. Wendy bought a ticket for the first row of seats and climbed into the bus, which was already under steam and waiting for passengers. The cab driver waved goodbye to her, and she suddenly wanted to remember her first and only love so badly that she barely waited until all the other departing passengers had taken their seats. No one had bought a ticket next to her. She cozily settled down on 2 seats at once and plunged into the times of 30 years ago. Every couple's love story is different. In one, fatal passions boil in the other, and the craving for sentimental romance is off the charts. The third duo builds relationships as in Shakespeare's tragedies. If you try to characterize the love of Wendy and Ben in one word, the most suitable definition would be: pure mutual love came to them at first sight. He's in favor of Khmelov. The girl stared helplessly at the piece of glass sticking out of her hand. She heaved with happiness the moment the cracking sounded, ripping their cotton shirts into bandages. Their worlds were different. He came from a family of hereditary doctors of intellectuals. She is the daughter of Martin and Miranda. Born and raised by the land in post-war farms. Poverty and want. They had little common ground. But does love ask whose hands to weave together? After that day when Vova and Yulai had spent all day setting up side-by-side feasts for students in the dining hall, and then dying laughing. When they watched comedy at the club, they were almost indistinguishable, as if they were glued to each other permanently. While Wendy is in the dining room with a tray flying in anticipation of a date night, puts the fruit carefully into the truck. Then he walks away without stopping anywhere. They run towards each other. In the endless conversations, we sometimes got lost and didn't understand each other. Wendy would tell how her parents ran to the farm at night. There was a calf that couldn't be born. Tortured her mom and the cow. Then Ben is foaming at the mouth asking if she's read Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, Ben's Family. This great novel, printed in a limited edition in 1973 for 3 days only, got. So he and his parents didn't eat for 3 days. They didn't sleep so they could read this literary masterpiece. Who's Pontius Pilate? Who's Woland? Who are the Master and Margarita? Wendy thought fearfully, I'm so far away from all this. Gently taking the girl by the hand and taking her to a club, to a dance, to a movie, or just wandering around the neighborhood. Not a hint of intimacy, only the endless admiration of people, which is impossible to play. Time inexorably flew forward. The days flashed by. Soon the students had to leave for the city. Wendy and Ben didn't notice anything. All around, they were dissolving into the marvelous gift of heaven of their first true love. Both had no previous experience of close contact with the opposite sex. Ben, contrary to the dreams of his parents, was not going to move along their medical path, delirious with formulas, integrals, and derivative mysteries of theoretical mathematics. That's why he went to Technical University and entered the medical school. After school he went. He was not fond of girls, neither at school nor at the student bench. As something at the age of 15 seemed to fall in love with the neighbor in the desk, but she, on the quiet, intelligent classmate, did not pay attention. All the notes on the lessons were written by Kolka, a dodderer. She made eyes at him. After classes, faithfully behind the school building on the sports ground waiting for his idol. Ben's feelings faded. He went back to his sign and cussing friends. Those didn't betray him. Wendy had more love lyrics in her life. Her faithful might. Nick's admirer had kept her busy since the 5th grade. Pulled my thick braid mercilessly. Demanded to write off homework regularly in the 8th grade. Tried to kiss at the New Year's Eve party. But Yule guessed his intentions and prudently ducked out of the school ball. As soon as Nick went outside for a smoke with the boys, she was gone. Now Ben and Wendy were lucky that the suitor, the girl, was not in the village. He had gone to the sea with his parents for 2 whole months. His mother got a job as a cook in a pioneer camp from the regional factory for the hot season of his father as a tutor in the circle, skillful hands. But they had been on some kind of shift positions before. No one in the village was surprised by their absence this time. Martin and Miranda noticed that Wendy wasn't walking, flying over the ground, but they didn't interfere in her private life. Miranda only remarked to her daughters, "Be careful, my good city boys. They're of a different mold. They're not like our country boys who do what's on their minds and what's in their actions. Don't worry about me, Mommy. He's the best." He won't lay a finger on me. We talk more and more about the stars at night. Naive thoughts who can beat Mother Nature and instincts. The last night before Ben left for home, he was so desperate not to let go of his beloved's hand. So affectionately did he look Wendy in the eye that she herself could not understand what had come over her, what sweet eclipse had pushed her to this act. Rising on tiptoe, she nestled her soft lips against Ben's, still smelling of the watermelon they had just eaten together. The boy dazedly wrapped his arms around her shoulders. The girl's hands stabbed at the top of his head with his nose. Don't provoke me. I purposely did not touch all this time. You, my darling. I'm afraid that if I touch you, I won't be able to stop. I have to leave tomorrow. Who knows what lies ahead? And without stopping, Wendy whispered in his ear, "It's my decision. I trust you completely." Ben didn't expect to be so bold at 19 years old. He'd never met a woman before. But he had long ago read the theory of his parents' manuals with curiosity. There was not a gram of awkwardness, fear of seeming an inexperienced beginner. Of course, he had long dreamed of intimacy with Wendy, but he was afraid of offending her. And to avoid deliberately snapping, even to a kiss, he never went beyond a peck on the cheek to a goodbye. He treasured her too much, cherished her too much, her honor too respected. There is such a reverent attitude to the object of his worship. Not all young men only come up with strategies and tactics to get their girlfriend into bed faster. Upon returning home, Ben intended to announce to his parents that he had met the love of his life. This year, he will now travel to the village to visit Wendy all the time. Then she too would enter the institute, move closer to him. To the city, the hour would come, they would get married. The girl was too young to break her destiny. Love decided everything for them both, did not resist, did not hold back. Wendy regretted nothing. Ben was over the moon. Later at night, after their timid, naive lovemaking rite in the field, amidst the swaying of their approvingly budding flowers on a soft carpet of lush green grasses, they lay for a long time, hugging each other tightly. They dreamed of the future. They will certainly have a family, certainly 3 children. Their cozy nest, somewhere in the city for the summer, will come to her parents in the village, to once again be in the place where they were joined. This dark blue sky with shells, stirring on it distant stars. In the morning, a service bus came to pick up the students. They parted easily with certainty that already next weekend Ben would come to his beloved for a visit. He didn't. Like in water, he disappeared. Wendy was unaware that at home parents met the guy on suitcases, sharing the news. "Son, we're so happy." Dad was appointed director of a huge surgery center in the Far East modern complex. All the equipment in it is state-of-the-art. The best specialists from all over the country are gathered under its roof. It's a great fortune to work there. We've already learned everything. There's also a state university nearby with a math department like yours. The day after tomorrow, we'll fly to the site. Why are you pale? What happened? Ben dropped his bag. He thought frantically. What do we do? We agreed with Wendy to correspond daily. While in the mail, I left her my address. And I'd promised to write by return receipt. She'd go crazy if they suddenly disappeared. After we had lunch together, Ben told my mother that he had met an extraordinary girl in the village, that he was in love, that he missed her already. Withheld only the fact that they were with Wendy and close. After listening to the moody offspring, the wise woman solved his problem right away. She went to her neighbor in the stairwell, with whom she was very friendly, and agreed that all correspondence that will come to their address, she will immediately send them to the east. When I returned home, I immediately told my son how she had found a way out of the situation. I thought to myself, I will return to this issue later. If I realize that our boy is really seriously attracted to that stranger. Otherwise, he will have new friends, fellow students, new interests, and new girls. Life will work itself out. All the things that went on in the Ben family over 30 years ago, Wendy, of course, didn't know. She herself, before she could even see her boyfriend off on the bus, rushed straight home to try out her pen in epistolary style. Yesterday's schoolgirl was not strong at all. She was very afraid to write something stupid, so she decided that she would tell on paper to her favorite, how each of her day goes. The letter of a few lines was given to her with great difficulty, when only a day later she carried to the post office her written creation, in a bright envelope painted with a heart. Ben and his parents were boarding a plane at the airport. 10 hours into the flight, the airliner landed at the airport. They would soon find themselves on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. What did the scenic land have in store for them? Ben's parents. The young man himself, Wendy, Martin, and Miranda, could not even think that a gray cardinal would interfere in the fate of two hearts in love. Ben's neighbor from the family, from the apartment across the street. The reason is trivial, but it was this little trifle that managed to forever turn the fates of the two families, led in their lives already on completely different rails. The fact is that the neighbor had a very young daughter, long ago in love with Ben. And she has already quite and made her mother dreams that when she grows up, she will become Ben's soulmate. Bride to wife mother, herself raised a now 13-year-old girl without a father. To the family of successful doctors looked at illogically. With the long-range goal of inbreeding in the future, it's nothing that they've gone to Kamchatka for the long money. They left the apartment in her care. They didn't even rent it to anyone. She's been trying for years to placate, to please, to inspire trust, to bake a couple of hearty cabbage pies. One neighbor's doctor's ear. That, and with perpetual on-call surgeries. When his family with powerful masterpieces to pamper will make strawberry jam, half jars. Again from my neighbor's dear. She has whole strawberry bushes on her dacha, so it's hard for her to share with nice people. So, offering honey with a good-natured question and participation in the family of surgeons and tamed. Into her soul they had no time to look. Taking out the first letter from Wendy with fake red hearts on the envelope, she didn't send it anywhere. She hid it in a candy box. Let it wait for its time. The rest of the masterpieces in epistolary style from the girl in love went there as well. For the first time she dared to open the message when the hearts on it were black in color. Who had already 3 months since the neighbors had gone to faraway places. Ben's mother pelted the neighbor with questions over the phone. Nothing came for her son. The conniving woman held her ground like a gorilla. Everything that came in your name, I dutifully sent you immediately to the neighbor. Nothing else appeared in your mailbox. Now she held above the steam this last grim, as she called it to herself, envelope quite agitated. It contained only a couple of lines. Ben, I can't keep quiet any further. I'm pregnant. I'm still keeping it from my parents. But if you don't answer this cry of my soul, I'll go and tell them about my problem. The mother of a teenager in love, a daughter from Ben's warring homesickness, could not help but destroy such a letter in favor of the love of a young man and his mysterious village girlfriend. Knowing the intelligence of this all-medical family, she had not the slightest doubt. They would not leave the girl, impregnated by their son, at the mercy of fate. Not even the smallest one. Remorse did not arise in the soul of the loving mother when she propped the ill-fated letter over the flames of the gas stove in the kitchen. It was nothing that the papers got a little burnt and her fingers. Ben's wedding to another person is not going to happen. Let her deal with her own grief and the consequences of her promiscuity. When he did not regard the fact of the love child's coming into the world as a nuisance or grief, she was still insanely gullible and eager to hear from Ben. She justified it in every way she could. His silence invented 1,000 explanations. Why the beloved has not yet responded to her letters. When there was no point in hiding her situation from her parents, she told Miranda and Martin. She said that she had no regrets, that she loved Ben more than life, that she wanted them to be close. There was no scolding, no anger, no bewilderment on the part of the elders. Miranda's mom hugged her with her small but very strong arms. She looked into her eyes and said something. Only she alone could read in them. Then she said, as she nailed every word, "If your town beau vaporized forever, without his involvement, don't listen to the evil tongues in the village. A great true love. Not everyone gets it. People will envy your happiness. Isn't it happiness to have a child with the one you love? Remember, my dear, if the heavens gave you a child right away after your close encounter, it means that the Lord God himself approved of your deed. Look at the world with joyful eyes. Have the baby. Daddy and I will always be there for you. The news that Wendy would soon become a young mother could not be kept secret for long in the village, of course. Nick, who had returned from the seas, was furious and even tried to scandalize Wendy by catching her in the street. "So that's the girl who won't give horns to me," and with the other while she had time to tumble. Quickly the impregnable fortress fell. "Or have you always been such a girl?" "And me just for fun." Wendy tried to walk by, throwing angry accusations at the guy. And he suddenly rushed to her and frantically begged her, "Don't you listen to me. I've got some damn jealousy in me. If it happens that your sweetheart will not come back to you, I'll marry you, and we'll raise your baby together." Wendy was unspeakably surprised by such statements of her longtime admirer. Knowing his hard temper, she didn't believe a single thing he said, and Ben alone owned her feminine heart. A glance at Nick and the expression shameful became immediately understandable. Her heart grew cold at the sight of Nick, crusted with ice. She wanted to run away right away. She didn't tell the guy about the frost inside. She thanked him dryly for his offer to be together, and replied firmly that it was impossible. This dialogue somehow became the last straw in her agonizing wait for Ben when she came home. A letter flew into town already without any hearts on the envelope. "Hello, Ben. Today I decided to marry another man. Are you somewhere far away? He's always around. I don't see a future with you anymore. Goodbye, our love. I was probably just dreaming. Nick is reliable and faithful to me, which I appreciate." It wasn't Wendy's hand on the piece of paper. All these words were written for her by resentment, bitterness, and disappointment, whispered in her ear that it was necessary to write something derogatory, contemptuous, cruel to her beloved in revenge. Yes, she loved him with all her heart. Wendy still wouldn't sling mud, retaliate, reprimand. There's an expression for fate. She thought it was just such a case. The ubiquitous middleman, with whom it was assigned to send correspondence, could not believe her luck. Thoughts were beating in her head like birds. Her heart couldn't take it. The girls did have her back speed turned on. Gave up on Ben. And that's all my daughter and I want. I'll send this letter of hers east with great pleasure. The neighbors said the kid devotes all his time to his studies. So let it be so. He will finish university. His daughter will just get a school diploma. Asked to visit them in the Far East to look at the Far East. And there everything may be and get better. Monolithic plan of a woman who took on the role of a student Ben and Wendy was not destined to come true. There's a reason people talk about boomerangs. It caught up with her after the nasty deed she'd done. A young lady in love with Ben. In her senior year of high school, she drastically changed her priorities and orientations. Caught in a bad company, addicted to various drugs. The mother of one of her classmates worked in a pharmacy. The boy, who had no one to leave alone at home, practically grew up in the back room of the establishment, selling medicines. Involuntarily began to understand a little about them. And then the fashion went to all sorts of pills for an extra penny, and they could get them without a prescription. Young people didn't let this opportunity pass. One day on a bet to make a weakness, all the company decided to try a novelty. The boys drank a whole handful of medicine. The neighbor's daughter could not be pumped out. After the funeral, the mother didn't last long without consolation. Why live if the only daughter loved by blood went to heaven untimely? God was even more cruel to her. He didn't give her a quick death. He took away her mind. Only nephew among her relatives. The seventh water on the vine. Would he take care of a crazy aunt with a guardianship? Quickly dumped the grief-stricken woman in a specialized clinic, and the apartment for the time being surrendered to temporary tenants, taking apart things in the house before the arrival of tenants. The whole stand is like old cardboard boxes. Other unnecessary junk to the trash cans from the sack. That's where the candy box with Ben's letters from Wendy went. Now there's no trace of their once great love. The last evidence of this story has faded into oblivion. In early June, Wendy gave birth to a son, as was the due date. The family named the boy Andrew. He was a big, strong boy. His smile was growing vigorously. Grandfather Martin and Grandmother Miranda in The Price of the Soul did not dote. Mama Wendy idolized the boy. In each of his features similarity to his favorite found childhood, like all the guys in the village. Fields and meadows with variety. Vegetables and fruits in the garden and in the vegetable garden. Favorite river with cool water. Animal life in all yards with cow's bird kingdom. Sharp Miko with glasses. And Papa Vova in the family tried not to remember even by hints. Perfectly realizing still aching heart of the daughter still washes at night with secret tears about the first love. Ben, at the State Technical University, received with open arms. His credit card is full of grades. Excellent. The knowledge was on the level. Very soon he was able to plunge back into his favorite formulas. At first he waited for letters from Wendy so eagerly and impatiently that his father and mother even feared a little for his mental health. Then there was a period of supposed calm. Vova didn't ask about news from his hometown. His parents avoided the subject in every possible way. Letter. Ben took the verdict of the village novel a little strangely. As if something like this was ready. He didn't want to share the heartbreak with his parents. Oil the disappointment inside himself. I won't voice my assessment of the events. But youth, new discoveries, new places, new acquaintances took their toll. Gradually it began to seem to him that he invented all this field with soft grass, the scents of flowers, the greedy lips, the favorite gleam in her eyes. Maybe everyone's first experience leaves such vivid emotions. But in reality, it wasn't so romantic. Somewhere in my heart there were still echoes of memories. And then they turned into a light haze of a dream like a fairy tale on the background of village scenery. Ben gave himself completely to science and was very successful in it. Even before defending his diploma, a prestigious foreign journal published his small monograph on the application of some mathematical formulas in industry. The whole USA was seriously interested in the young mathematician. A year after defending his diploma, Ben was invited for a long internship in one of the American universities. After consulting with his parents, he gave his consent. On the personal front, a technician mathematician, showing great promise, was not at all a reclusive monk, had affairs with fellow students, did not ignore the sparkling parties, easily made not burdensome, and connections with women. His heart was silent. He sometimes later did not even remember their names. On a trip to the United States went alone, and there already on the spot suddenly fell in love, an affair with a bright brunette from Florida, studying psychology at the same institution where he was assigned to give a course of lectures. Reminiscent of the tsunami typhoon of the tornado love whirlwind, when offered a contract for another 5 years, agreed enthusiastically. Gina finished her studies, finally moved in with him on campus, where he was assigned a staff cottage, a great emerald lawn, and at the entrance and a pool in the backyard. Gina had only one serious flaw. She was medically unable to have children. At first it had stressed Ben, but then he'd accepted it. He loved this woman with a strange, morbid affection. After the modest wedding, little changed in their union. Ben still worked night and day on his mathematics. His wife chose to become a homemaker. After a successful stint at Marriage University, Ben became a resident of this western state. Had not been to his parents for many years. Modern gadgets now allowed him to communicate with his folks on a large computer screen. His restless ancestors never parted with medicine and refused to even visit him and his daughter-in-law for an hour. In the rare days of freedom from work, Ben and Gina traveled extensively. His royalties grew ever larger. On the basis of unusual developments under his authorship, there were already many things implemented in industrial sectors and even in the space field. The stuffing of his writings was so abstruse. So what? What are they talking about? Only narrow specialists understood. And Ben was engaged in all new tasks and could not stop. If he was asked what his life in America was like, he would not hesitate to say that it was happy and serene. It seemed that this prosperous era would be endless. But to whom do the fates allocate only white? Had been chilly. The woman kept tangling in a fashionable fur jacket left over an evening dress, and saved herself with another portion of whiskey. So as not to finally freeze, picked up a glass of hot nectar, reached out her hand to the tongs to add years to the drink. It was at that moment that she encountered a glimpse of burning eyes. Men with flamboyant looks. They say love is passion. These are the tricks of chemistry. The molecules of two bodies and souls collide in the air. Some catalyst intervenes and it's done. Gina and her new object of attention. That's what happened. They left the party together. The woman didn't care what her husband thought about it. A love affair lingering like a tightrope between two hearts. The wife did not hide it from Ben. The conversation was brief. "I don't care what happens tomorrow, darling. Today I am madly in love and also madly happy. You don't deserve to be deceived by me, so I'm telling you all this to your face, and I'm sorry. It's just the way it is." Ben listened to his wife calmly. He had already guessed what was going on and was unsurprised by his painful bodily reaction. This is how we, who had learned at the beginning of their relationship, passed. By and large, he didn't care where or with whom his spouse spent time. Their love was exhausted. Even the warmth was almost gone. A tribute to the years they'd spent together, nothing more. He suddenly wanted to leave everything in this distant country, which had never really become his native country, and return to Russia to his parents. But the laws did not allow him to disappear overnight, immediately after his divorce from his wife. He was still bound by certain obligations with the university, continued some scientific developments, went their way lectures. It was necessary to solve issues with real estate and other property, earned over years of hard work. The state and the company he worked for paid specialists of his level generously. He managed to accumulate a considerable amount of capital that could help him in his homeland. Start from scratch. It took Ben 2 years, it took Ben 2 endless years. Of course, during the time he lived there, he got out several times to his parents to see them in person. But he never traveled further than the Far East. Now, he wanted to make a voyage to the places of his childhood and youth of his student years. The plans were grandiose. And then there was a meeting with his classmates in his hometown. He really wanted to take an active part in it. Andrew's New Year's Eve romance. It was a stormy and memorable affair. Maria was amazing, but she had only one drawback. She constantly, like a powerful vacuum cleaner, pulled out of Andrew all his earnings. After a couple of months, it became clear that not only his salary and advance payment, but also his rainy day stash were flying into the wind. And Maria kept saying, "Kodik, you are so cool. Buy me that purse that drove me crazy in the mall." She didn't want her mistress to take care of the household chores at any price. They ordered food from restaurants all the time. Once a week, the clinic came to clean the apartment. His own company inside Andrew began to grow and deafening irritation. But it was not so easy to get rid of a wide-awake passport. By the May holidays, she decided in with the news that she was pregnant. Talked about a stamp in the passport. Fashionable in a wedding dress from the latest collection, necessarily diamonds in small ears, so that all her friends collapsed with envy. Marriage was not exactly in Andrew's plans. He became visibly despondent. At that time, his companions sat with their friends in the bar and shared her plans for the near future. "Girls, here's another sucker fell for my bait. I've already sold him the story that we're having a baby. Now he's scrambling for a way out, and I've got the next trump card up my sleeve. I'll tell him I'm ready to get rid of the baby. Where would he know that after my first abortion, I probably won't have kids? And I'm a child-free person myself. I don't need cute little babies screaming in diapers. Are they afraid that any of your men have figured out your pregnancy adventure?" One of my friends asked, stirred a cocktail with a bright red plastic straw. "What are you talking about?" grinned the experienced schemer. Most modern men are so afraid of the flow of the stamp in the passport of legal marriage that they rush to pay off their freedom. Andrew, meanwhile, was running through his head a combination of how to pull off a deal on behalf of his company and get a large kickback for services from suppliers. He had no experience with commercial tricks. That was okay, he could handle it. The main thing is that the preparation of this contract was entrusted to him. There was one thing the man hadn't taken into account. His boss was a clever businessman. He noticed the greedy glint in his subordinate's eyes when talking about a new purchase of equipment, so he gave the security service the task to follow Andrew and all his movements. A week later on his desk was a full report on the unbridled appetites of Marina, who also worked in the same firm. learned and experienced servicemen through her friends and about the scam conceived by her. They even knew that Andrew had already accepted the terms of separation from his mistress. Even crossed himself mentally. Lord, let him go to all four sides. What marriage? What children? From all this only unnecessary troubles appear. The company decided to catch Andrew red-handed at the moment of his meeting with the machine manufacturers. So the two sides hit it off. The envelope with the reward is already in Catch's hands. It's time to let further events take a different course. Given that this was the employee's first attempt to pocket the transaction fee for the purpose of purchasing substandard equipment, the chief fired Andrew without severance. The man was immediately followed by a rumor that he was unreliable. Specialist hiring him is not recommended. All Wendy's aspirations and endeavors have been flushed down the social garbage chute. How many lessons she once did with her boy, how many tutors she took him to the city before he entered the technical university, so that he could pass the exams with high scores and enter the budget. The unified state exam was introduced in the region then as a trial experiment, not by teachers and not by students. They didn't know how this system would work yet, but he and Andrew succeeded. How much later in his student years fed, clothed? Could a young man live on a paltry stipend with his already then not small demands? And that's their habit. All summer to prepare supplies for the winter, to then solemnly hand the tasty gifts to their son. It's been 6 months now, and Wendy still couldn't understand what made Andrew kick her out of the house in a blizzard. But she didn't want to find out what he had and how he was doing. She and Miranda's mom were also screwing jars of lines and creations this summer. Under the long conversations, still also the soul in each other. They did not know that Andrew, having long ago parted with Marina, was now living on casual earnings. He was addicted to cheap, strong drinks, which are taken from unknown sources to the convenience store around the corner. His mother was unaware that now he would consider it a blessing to boil those homemade potatoes and snack on vodka, crunching shields, with his mother's cucumber. Sometimes he had impulses to go to the village and apologize. But his pride was not all drowned in the swamp of degrees. He'll find himself a regular job. Nose in front of everyone, and then he will appear as a king in his small homeland. The Jubilee meeting in honor of the 30th anniversary of graduation was very heartwarming. Ben did not expect that his classmates followed his scientific successes, were proud of him, the city of childhood and youth. In general, he was greeted very warmly. Not much had changed. Everything was native and familiar. When I heard about the tragic events in the family of my former neighbors in the stairwell, I thought, I wondered how my life would have turned out if my father had not been assigned to this new surgical center in the East. Some left-wing worm in my soul started pushing him around. Go to that village where you met your first love. No one's obliging you to do anything. But don't you want to put an end to that old story? By renting a car well in line. For the regional center, this kind of service was still a novelty. He, on the other hand, had always liked the Western way of doing things. He vaguely remembered the name of the village where he had once harvested watermelons and melons, but it did not embarrass him at all. He remembered the approximate route. On the highway he got there quickly, but when he turned to the dirt road, he grinned to himself. Some things in his native village had not changed a bit even for more than 30 years. On the way he was caught up with Zapoliarni from all sides of the car, and Ben just stopped on the road to have a snack before it got dark, and raised his hand to ask the driver to stop. Good people. Good evening. He greeted the middle-aged man. Can you tell me how far it is to the village? I haven't been to your area for many years. The owner of the car looked curiously at a foreign-looking gentleman in an expensive jacket and new jeans. Are you going to visit someone? Or do you travel around the neighborhood for the sake of idle curiosity? Ben decided not to humor me and answered honestly. I'm looking for my acquaintances, the family of Uncle Martin and Aunt Miranda. They had a daughter named Wendy. They do. Only the head of the family's been dead for about 7 years. The rest of them are alive and well. Ben's mouth was watering with excitement. Even his tongue was getting a little stiff. Wendy and her husband probably have a separate family, children, Wendy's son. There's a big guy. I even took her to him in town last winter on New Year's Eve. She's never been married. Had a kid 30 years ago. She's a student. But he left her when she was pregnant. I turned her down, but I have nothing more to do with you. Nick once again looked suspiciously at the colorful for their place man jumped into his car and across the field on the road. Ben remained standing in the middle of the road in utter confusion, then just as abruptly climbed into the car. He couldn't wait any longer. Now he would find his first love, his first woman. And what will be will be. In the village he found an old cottage, still Wendy's grandfather's. Without a hitch, it was dark. Behind that curtain, a bright light burned in the hut. From the open window, the muffled sound of the television could be heard. He walked from the wicket gate to the porch on still legs, climbed the 3 steps and knocked on the door. Behind it came brisk footsteps and a woman's whisper. "Wendy, look what it's like to be here at night." Wendy threw a warm shawl over her shoulders. She had just bought her mother back and was dressing her in clean clothes. There was no chance of catching a cold. Raspy, after water procedures, without fear, opened the door and looked out into the anteroom. Silently looked at the guest from head to toe and said a phrase that made Ben's heart sink. "I knew you'd come back. Every love story may or may not have a sequel. Some endings are like a fairy tale. How did it happen in this wonderful novel? You listen to the story of Ben and Yuli's love story. There's so much irony. Some fable writer is feeding fables. It doesn't happen in real life, but it happened. Wise woman's heart, Wendy, didn't hold a judgment on her lover's actions. Ben's sensible male heart immediately prioritized. With mathematical precision, she scattered the answers to the tasks at hand. They both never found out. Where had the girl's letters gone? What evil genius and masterminds of fate had played for them this sad play of long separation, starring them? Andrew, already the 2nd year working as a loader in an ordinary store, decided after his shift to look into a beer bar to relax a little. Lately, he has stopped with stronger drinks, began to regret his liver, had enough sense, a little slow down. The man at the far table seemed vaguely familiar. Grabbing a mug with a still unsettled cap of foam and a plate with hints of C's, he headed over to keep him company. Nick, and that was him. After dealing with all the issues, he decided to stop by the first bar he could find to quench his appetite. He didn't recognize Andrew in the unpleasant bearded man. The man swaggered into the chair across from him. That kindly, there were no other tables around. With a grudge, he asked his named neighbor, "You don't recognize me, Uncle Nick. I'm Russian, we're from the same village." Only now Nick realized that the already tipsy man really remotely resembled Wendy's son. Only lowered and aged, but he was still recognizable. "How's life up there?" "My grandmother is still alive, and my mother is still working on her lines." Andrew tried to stretch his face in a crooked smile, but his mood suddenly dropped. Why did he have to go to a countryman? It seems that once he was in love with his mother would talk now, he will start to teach him about life. But Nick grinned good-naturedly and answered that the whole village prays to your mother nowadays. We now have a new road with good asphalt. Her husband organized the whole thing and paid for it. Miranda's grandmother was treated at a surgical center in the East. She didn't become a frisky goat, but she's moving around with a stick. Did your parents build such a nice place next to the old house? It's a sight to behold. Andrew thought he'd misheard. Why did Uncle Nick say parents and not one mother? As if listening to his thoughts, the countryman explained. It was a beautiful love story. 30 years later, they were reunited again, all in the countryside. We used to think that such things happen only in books and movies, but no. I've witnessed it myself. It's strong and faithful. It happens. A woman's love waited for her, so gave hope that even at their age happiness is still possible. Come on, brother, I still have to get home. Whether to say hello to my mother or to deign to appear in their house. I'll take care of it myself, Andrew muttered. His mood had finally plummeted, along with his ego. A Pazik pulled away from the bus, stopped near the village. The driver looked back at the passenger compartment. In this place, only some guy got out. All the way he was moving his lips as if he was practicing a speech. Andrew was really hard at work on the words he would say to his mother to apologize. But everything that came into his head seemed empty and insignificant. Love for one's family is in actions, not words. Would he be able to earn forgiveness from his parents? The man crept quietly to the open gate and peered through the opening. Workers were laboring in the yard near the old house. Next to the construction site, there was a picturesque fifth house of 2 floors. It immediately reminded Andrew of some fairy tale log cabin, where forest gnomes or some other magical characters could live. Everything around breathed cozy, some special homely charm. His mother walked through the yard in an embrace with a gray-haired man. "It's a nice bathhouse. It'll work. Don't worry. Miranda's mom will be back from her treatment soon. It'll be a nice surprise for her." He kissed the woman affectionately on the top of her head and hurried off to the workers to give him new orders. Wendy returned to the gazebo where the electric kettle was already boiling in full swing. On the table was a jar of Andrew's favorite apricot, Andrew's new jam, and a box of cookies. He pushed the wicket door open and took a step forward, mentally vowing to himself that he would do everything he could to make his family forgive him and welcome him back into their home. If need be, he'll start from scratch again, from the basics. He now knows exactly what things rule this world. Someday he'll teach it to his children.